My first memory of sleep paralysis happened when I was 10 years old. I remember it because it was the night my parents took me to see Shrek 2 to celebrate my good grades. We got home late, and I remember how my mom tucked me into bed, pressing my blankets too tightly, like she was trying to keep something out. It was around 4 in the morning when I woke up. I saw the faint glow from my alarm clock, but that was the only thing I could see. I couldn't feel anything. Not my pajamas against my skin, not the warmth of my pillow. My limbs felt wrong, heavy, like they were tied down, as though something unseen was pressing me into the bed. I tried to call out, but my throat was constricted. My lips refused to part. I managed a weak, gurgling sound, but it didn't resemble a voice, more like a sound that came from the deep, dark abyss of my mind. I thought I was dead. I thought I had died, and no one knew. I was trapped, aware, but unable to move, unable to scream. My heart thudded against my chest, loud enough that it felt like the whole room was shaking with it. I thought of being buried alive. The thought made my blood run cold. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't tell anyone I was still here. And then I saw him, for the first time. Mr. BrownStickLegs. He was standing in the far corner of the room, his long limbs contorted unnaturally, almost as if he had crawled out from a forgotten nightmare. His eyes, those huge, glowing red eyes, shone in the dark. There was no warmth in them, no kindness, just an empty, predatory stare. His face was a blank mask, no mouth, no nose, just smooth, white porcelain with those horrid, unblinking eyes that drilled into mine, like he could see inside me, deeper than I could bear. He began to move, his body unfolded like something too large to be real, limbs jerking as though they weren't meant to bend that way. He rose higher and higher until his head scraped against the ceiling. His neck snapped at an impossible angle, bending forward to get closer to me. His body was covered in strange black symbols that shimmered red in the dim light. The shadows from his spindly legs twisted and stretched, as though they had a life of their own. He made no sound, not a creak, not a breath. It was as though he didn't belong to the world I was trapped in, like he was floating, hovering just above the ground. His long, thin arms reached down to me, like he was preparing to pluck me from my bed. I moaned, but my lips were paralyzed. I wanted to scream, but nothing came out except for that terrible croaking noise. His fingers brushed against my face, cold, sharp, yet his touch was almost tender, too gentle. His voice was so deep, so powerful, it resonated in my chest as if his words were coming from the air itself. Do not struggle, little one. Sleep. Sleep. I wanted to refuse, but I couldn't. My body was frozen, my mind desperate to flee but trapped in that cold, silent hell. I convinced myself it was a dream, a nightmare that would end when I woke up. But I wasn't sure anymore. Was it real? Was he real? The thought made my stomach churn. I closed my eyes, wishing it all away. I woke up the next morning, relieved to find I could move, walk, talk. But the memory of those red eyes, of his cold fingers, stayed with me. I told my parents about it, but they brushed it off as just a nightmare. My mom suggested something from Shrek 2 might have scared me, but that didn't make sense to me. That wasn't what I saw. But Dad was skeptical too. To prove it was just a dream, he asked me to draw what I had seen. When I finished, I realized I had run out of black crayon, so I used the next darkest color. I handed him the drawing, my fingers trembling. "Hey there, Mr. BrownStickLegs," my dad said, trying to sound lighthearted. "You leave my daughter alone, you hear?" But when I looked at the drawing, something felt wrong. The image I had drawn didn't look like the creature I saw. The figure in the corner of my room that night was somehow more terrifying. The way his body loomed, the unnatural angles of his limbs, his endless eyes. Giving him a name, Even a silly one helped ease my mind for a while, but it didn't stop the creeping dread. That night, after my parents did their usual sweep of the room, calling out for Mr. BrownStickLegs like a pet, I searched the shadows one more time before slipping under the covers. Over the next weeks, my routine remained the same. Every night before sleep, I would scan my room. Even when I went to sleepovers, I would scan the corners and dark spaces of the room before I dared close my eyes. But as time passed, I grew tired, less vigilant, until one night, just before the first day of 5th grade, I woke up to find him already there. He was sitting on my bed, straddling me, his cold, empty face inches from mine. His eyes glowed brighter, too bright, too burning. A scream caught in my throat, but only a faint wheeze escaped, like air deflating from a balloon. "Hush, child," he whispered. His voice wasn't just deep. It felt like it was pulling at the edges of my mind. My thoughts felt like they were swirling in a dark void, the words echoing inside my skull. I looked down and saw he was holding something crumpled in his long, pale fingers. He held up a piece of paper, the edges torn and ragged. "I found the picture you drew of me," he said, his voice slithering in the air. "So, I drew a picture of you." I couldn't even blink. I was frozen in place. His image on the paper was grotesque, distorted. His limbs weren't just thin. They looked like they could reach inside of you, pull out your heart, your soul. "I like your pants," he said with a smile that never reached his empty eyes. "Will you draw more for me? I like it when you give me clothes." I could feel the panic rising inside me, but I couldn't move, couldn't scream. He tucked the picture under my pillow, and I felt his fingers brush my eyelids once more, pushing them shut with the softest, most unsettling gentleness. The next morning, I bolted up, gasping for air. My pillow. There was something under it. I ripped it off, my heart sinking when I saw it. His drawing, right there. He was real. I drew another picture for him. I had to. It was like a compulsion. This time, I gave him more details. I wanted him to like it, to keep him away from me. The thought of school, of going back to my normal life, didn't help. The whole day I kept thinking about what he wanted. Was he getting closer? Would he follow me? Would I ever be free? And I wrote him a letter. It felt like I had no choice. "Dear Mr. BrownStickLegs, I hope you like your blue pants.